Hmm. All right. Okay. This is The Grass is Greener on WXRW 104.1 FM in Milwaukee. I am the host of the program, Gary Grass. With me is my co-host, Babette Cruneau.
And with us is Latin
Hold on a second. Did you turn... What microphone are you using?
I'm.
You're not... No one can hear you.
Oh,
You want to try one of the other ones? I'm going to turn on a different microphone and see if that works.
does the green one work?
No. Oh, we have a technician.
Does this work?
No, you're not doing... I'm not hearing anything.
Hello?
Well, I mean, it's like, all these things just got turned on, but all the sliders are down, so. One of those.
Yeah.
Okay, blue works.
Right.
All right, we're going to put you on blue.
That's fine. All right. And with us we have our Latin America correspondent and the editor of Venezuela Analysis, Ricardo Vaz. Welcome, Ricardo.
Hi Gary, hi Babette.
Oh,
Great
hi.
to be back. I'm sorry. We had a hard time in recent weeks because I was moving and so on, but great to be here.
We've been having a lot of hard times. Notice that we had no time to check the microphones before today, so.
A lot of changes and things. So
last week we had to run down the street to get our guest.
Get an alternative guest.
Yeah.
But hey, we have you now.
Shows you're quick on your feet.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have you now.
All
So
right. You kind of have to be.
What's been going on in Latin America while we've been waiting to hear from you?
Nice broad question there.
Yeah, so I mean, let's start with let's start with the bad news, maybe.
Bolivia.
Although I'm not sure the other ones are going to be good news necessarily, but this is definitely the worst. And this is something we've kind of seen this disaster unfold over the last 2 or 3 years at least. I'm almost certain that every time I've been on, we've kind of discussed and said, this is not looking good.
Oh,
maybe,
yeah, I know. I know.
Maybe they can still pull it together and avoid a complete disaster. But as it turns out, they did not pull it together. They did not avoid a complete disaster. And now, I mean, you look back and this is, if you ask the right wing.
If anyone missed what we're talking about here, they just had general elections in Bolivia.
Yeah.
And
So
the Socialist Party, MAS, came in 6th place with like 3% of the vote, as from what I saw, right?
Yeah, this was unmitigated disaster. So it was the first round of the presidential elections, as you were saying. And the two most voted candidates, because nobody reached the 50% threshold or a 10% margin ahead of second place. So two of them are going to the second round. They are Rodrigo Paz and Tuto Quiroga. And they are basically right and a little more to the right. Tuto Quiroga was even president during a short time, these very unstable times in the early 2000s where, presidents didn't last very long. But still, I mean, he's one of these very useful U.S. puppets that signs on to every statement condemning, I don't know, Venezuela or Nicaragua, and he signed as former Bolivian president. And now he has a chance to become president again.
So the U.S. could have one of their little puppets back.
Yeah, I mean, whoever wins is going to be, to a greater or lesser degree, a new U.S. Maybe not puppet, but at least a very strong ally in the region, because, I mean, of course, they have to contend with the domestic scenario as well. But indeed, the MAS candidate, who was, even by their recent disastrous standards, the worst possible choice, it was the Interior and Security Minister, Eduardo Castillo. We're talking about an indigenous party, and they managed to choose a European descendant candidate for the elections, believe it or not. But I mean, last time I was on, I said there's this last glimmer of hope and that was Andrónico Rodriguez. Andrónico is from the same cocoa-producing region as Evo. He has this peasant background, and he was for a while not just a strong Evo Morales ally, but also seen as the possible future of the party. I mean, when there was the coup, he was one of the leading figures in fighting back, and so we were thinking, maybe Arce and Evo are not going to be happy, but maybe they can compromise that this is a
So
decent
what
solution for them.
happened?
Well, Evo refused to lend him his support, attacked him
Oh,
publicly. They even threw stones at him when he went out to vote. He only got
oh
in the
my
end
gosh.
like 8%. And Evo Morales, and I place most of the blame at his feet, for what it's worth, given my modest expertise. He
Yes,
had
yes.
this most politically sterile strategy in history, which was to call for null votes. So now there were like 19% of the votes were null, and he's trying to claim that, this is a major political statement. But what are you going to do with it? There's
There's nothing
no
you can do
outcome.
with a null vote.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's no outcome of it besides showing that you are still a popular figure, which was never in question. You just, uh, close yourself and refuse to avoid a much worse scenario for the country, because now, whoever wins is going to mean, I mean, we had a glimpse of it in just 1 year of this coup government of the self-proclaimed, I mean, the Bolivian Guaido,
Oh,
Janine Áñez, which was privatization deals with the IMF and so on, and that was in a kind of state of emergency. So imagine now with a constitutional mandate and this level of discredit for the ruling coalition, the disaster it could mean in terms of allowing access to lithium to foreign corporations and plunging the country in debt for decades to come. What we saw in other countries like Argentina when the left or the progressive governments went out of power. So it is, I mean, it is an unmitigated and really self-inflicted disaster. And now everyone is trying to wash their hands. I mean, Arce had this very vague, the president Arce had these very vague statements, congratulating Bolivians on their democratic exercise. They're just going to pretend that they had nothing to do with it.
yeah. Well, I mean, one guy says don't vote at all. The other guy says, "Oh well, a lot of you still voted. Congratulations." It seems like it's just more tit for tat between those two.
Yeah, I mean, there's no, even if you try, there's hardly a silver lining here. And it's not clear what happens next because Evo has these looming judicial charges against him. So, what's going to happen with the next government?
Oh.
Does does the MAS retain any kind of institutional presence to try and soften the blow and regroup and so on? I mean, we saw that this is not as assured as one might think. We had
Right.
this very short-lived coup attempt, so it's not really the case that they have a strong hegemony within the military. So it's not, even though they have a very significant demographic and I would say even a positive overall support, it's not clear that they are sufficiently organized or that they have a plan even to how they're going to go from here. I mean, it's not even clear uh, how they would organize. Is it the mass that's still with Arce, with the institutional backing? Are we talking about the groups around Evo? What happens to Andrónico? Andrónico was supposed to be the future. Is he now forever discarded? It's very, very uncertain, and there's a risk that they're just going to be fragmented, and that's just going to allow the right to undo all these 20 years of impressive progress, without any significant opposition.
It
Well,
could last for 20 years, kind of in a never world of, just, disaster.
well, I mean, yeah, I mean, or if you're looking for like a positive scenario, is there a positive scenario where, uh, you know, being attacked by the right, somehow, gets people back together again and pushes them back to doing, it just seems like sometimes it's, that can, there can lead to pushback. So
Yeah, that's one possibility, that if the whoever comes into power tries to bite off more than they can chew and go too hard after, economic rights, indigenous rights, and what have you, and that might actually identify at least a common enemy for the mass, or whatever the multiple splinters of the mass to rally around. I mean, that's certainly a possibility. But at the end of the day, they also need to get rid. I mean, they need to find a horizon. The horizon cannot just be ever returning to power at some point, whatever the cost. I mean, they need to think about a political project that goes beyond just the figure of Evo Morales. And there are also lessons looking back. There's an interview in La Jornada, actually, if you want to continue practicing your Spanish, by former Bolivian Vice President Garcia Linera. And I think it's a bit reductive in the sense that he attributes this disaster mostly to like incompetent economic measures, which I think is not the whole picture. But it also goes to, I mean, he opens the door but doesn't really discuss the limits of the progressive governments, or their shortcomings in the end, because they come into power on the exhaustion of the neoliberal predecessors. And in countries with natural resources like Bolivia, they are able to put forward redistribution and empowering these indigenous majorities and so on. But then sometimes they reach a kind of plateau where they are growing 6% every year, and it seems like everything's fine. But it gets stagnated, and then once it gets reversed, there's no longer a kind of politically active base to not only come up with plans and how to move forward, but also avoid these kinds of disasters. It just they become stagnant, and that opens room for the right, which was completely defeated in 2020. Not even they could have imagined such a scenario right now.
So-
I also think there's just a problem of when you get someone in there who is, when you get just a cult of personality. And I think they do have a bit of a problem with that, with Abel. And,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely. And
that could
I
be
think, I mean, Evo has, I mean, he's the main figure that we associate with this new chapter in Bolivian history. That's undeniable. But, after the 2019 coup, which was already preceded by some mistakes, this idea of running for a third term, even though it was not constitutionally allowed, but then they just made an improvised amendment, and they got the OAS, bad idea to ally yourself with the OAS. They got the OAS to endorse it in exchange for an observation mission. And then this observation mission was behind the whole narrative that led to a coup. So, Evo had to deal with that, and it was certainly unfair because he did win that election. But after that, and after Arce wins the presidency, he becomes, I mean, we talked about this, what's going to happen to Evo when he returns to Bolivia? Is he just going to be this looming shadow, over the government all the time? He cannot go back into a minor role. There was some initiative, like kind of a social movement alliance that he would lead, but apparently that wasn't enough. And so he had this idea that, he had to go back to the presidency, and he has this very faithful following. But in the end, that just led to the complete implosion of the movement. So it goes to show that, the social base was not sufficiently, did not have this debate seriously, what happens after Evo, and having a project that does not in the end depend on him, right? That
right.
has its own objectives and its long-term vision, and it's not just tied to a single, as important as he is and was, to a single political figure.
I mean, it seems like there's lots of different models for what a former leader can do. I mean, you just look around, there's like, former leaders are just falling off trees. I mean, they're all over the place. I mean, I was reading an article last week that mentioned Benicio Cerezo, of all people, the former president of Guatemala. It's like, that guy's still around? And, here he is. He's at some conference in Bolivia talking about the future of multipolarism in the Americas or something.
I mean,
And
the gold standard, quote unquote, is Pepe Mujica of Uruguay, who stepped away when after he felt that he had nothing else to offer, but remained active in supporting the party and so on, but without being a figure of division, right?
Without having to dictate.
Exactly, and without openly sabotaging
Right.
the government
yeah, right, yeah, right.
of his own party.
So let me, yeah,
And AMLO also faded quite elegantly into the background
Yeah.
after
yeah,
fulfilling his
no,
mandate.
it's I mean, that's a great example. And obviously we have our presidents here, some of whom have had a very good post presidency, and some of them have had a less than good post presidency.
Yeah, I mean, there are many who have been better post-presidents than actual presidents, like
Yes, yes. So,
Jimmy Carter.
yeah,
Right.
everyone thinks of Jimmy Carter for that, which is very, very true. Let me ask about the guys that are left for the runoff. I mean, I don't know either of these characters at all. I mean, just getting a quick, read on them, I kind of had the impression like, okay, there's a Christian Democrat who's gonna be like much more kind of more of a lackey to the U.S., very kind of middle of the road but anti-socialist policies, is going to be kind of maybe kind of a Jeb Bush not so bad kind of guy. And the other guy was described sort of as more far right, so maybe he's they have some pretty extreme examples in Latin America recently of what a far right character can look like in these Nabos, Bukeles, and Bolsonaros and so forth.
Yeah,
Millet, right? Is the other guy of that mold?
I don't think any of them is going to be of that mold. So
Well,
Quiroga,
that's a relief.
who, yeah, I mean, as far as as far as relief goes, Quiroga is, I mean, they're both career politicians, but Quiroga has, I mean, he was a president, he was Minister of Finance, so he's much more clearly associated to the pre-Morales period in Bolivia of just completely sidelining the Egyptian the indigenous majority and closely aligning with the US without any kind of reservations. The other guy, I mean, he was in Quiroga's party for a while, but he was also mayor and he had like a successful local government and was reelected at some point. He was, I mean, there was some rift in his party and he was left without the party, and actually the mass reached out to him and invited him to join, but he refused. So he appears, and he's, as you were saying, kind of more of a social Christian. He appears as more of an outside, as far as that can mean anything relevant in this case, even though he's a former mayor and former
Mm-hmm.
senator. But I think, and he actually surged in the polls. He was not favored. I mean, he wasn't like a lock to go to the runoff. But I think in the end, because of all the fragmentation in the mass, people ended up thinking that this is the least worst. I mean, at least Quiroga is the devil but since he's so bad, maybe go with the devil you don't know.
Wow.
Okay, so a lot of real attractive choices there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess let me see when the runoff is going to be, but I guess once that's closer, we can have another chat and see
Mm-hmm.
more in more detail what they stand for. Not that they're going to be a lot different from each other, but who knows?
Yeah, I mean it's entering into a great unknown.
Yeah, it's on October 19th, so in 2 months maybe we'll have a
Yeah.
chance to.
Take another look. So, who else has been having elections? Venezuela?
Yeah, Venezuela had a couple of elections which were very low stakes. There were on May 25 there were legislative and gubernatorial elections, and then in late July, there were municipal elections.
Mm-hmm.
But we're still in the shadow of the elections from last year and this far right sector that again has gone back to its abstention. And so according to the official results, the ruling coalition just basically swept everything. They won 23 out of 24 governors. They have, 85% of the seats in the National Assembly, 280 out of 330 municipalities. So basically, the political map is very red right now.
But only about 44% of the people voted. That's
no, actually, that's
not right.
The Electoral Council has come up with some creative language to make things look better than they are. So turnout was around between 25 and 28%.
Oh wow!
But they created a new category that they call active voters, and so they say instead of saying that 28% of the electorates voted, they say that 44% of active voters participated, but they never explained what active voters are. So I mean, you're left in the dark. But it's just a gimmick.
That's what you would expect the regular turnout to be, would be the active voters, and they got 44% of what they would expect a regular turnout to be, which sounds really impressive.
I mean, there's lots of speculation as to what they could mean. Just doing basic numerology, it kind of looks like they took the people who turned out 1 year ago as the active voters, and so it was 44% of those who turned out 1 year ago. But in the end, I mean, it's a low turnout in absolute standards. But in terms of the political context, with these very low stakes and people not really thinking that there's an alternative to the Socialist Party, the chunk of the opposition base is not really going to turn out. There's a kind of there's a generalized kind of demobilization and disinterest in politics right now, mostly within the opposition camp. And of course, the ruling party took advantage to secure all these institutions. But now, I mean, we are in, let's say, uncharted territory without any elections scheduled until at least 2029. So there's a question of whether there's going to be an attempt at a constitutional reform in the meantime, maybe next year. But that's still, sometimes the government talks about it. Sorry?
That can be a bit dangerous.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, at least for me, it's a very dangerous proposition because in these recent years, under the sanctions and so on, the government, of course, has had to react and make do in these conditions, but it has also involved a lot of opacity and concessions to private businesses, foreign businesses, and so on. Complete deregulation of labor conditions and collective bargaining agreements and so on. There's no longer wages, but these bonuses that do not have an impact for vacation pay, social security, severance, and so on. So concessions really for the private sector, and there's a generalized fear, and it's very well grounded, that the constitutional reform will mean to put these things that have been implemented informally, put them into law, kind of undoing some of the major advances of labor legislation, energy legislation, and so on. That's the fear. I mean, there are very clear signs in that direction. It's kind of a way to reaccommodate thinking that sanctions are here to stay, but in this perspective that you need to make all these concessions to the private sector and even surrender a bit of sovereignty in the process.
Well, that's not good, because even if you give concessions to the private sector, that they will not be happy with it. They'll just ask for more and more.
That's exactly what's going on, and it's very paradoxical, because if you go back to the early 2000s, some of these private sector guilds, like the Retailers Association or the Cattle Owners Association, they were very, very active against Chavez. They were active participants in the 2002 coup.
Oh, jeez.
And now you listen to them and they say, we are happy with the government's policies. We have these working groups with the government to determine the optimal remuneration schemes. They come up with these new terms to not talk about salaries and wages specifically. And we need to consider remuneration schemes that are not as onerous on businesses, which is, I mean, very liberal. Even if it's with a disguise, it's very liberal, a very liberal way of framing things.
Yeah, I mean, you've got, and I don't know, you have, obviously there's this large area of economic rollback, but you also see Maduro reaching out to like evangelical Christians. You see, you see maybe some. I mean, and there's the question: where the United States stands in all this. I mean, you've got, I guess, we still really want that oil, and Trump is sort of an unpredictable person to have there. So,
Well, Trump and Rubio, don't forget him. I mean, he's still going to be against Maduro. He's still going to be against Venezuela.
Well, forever, whatever role little Marco plays. I mean, that's an open question too. I mean, you've got. I mean, what's happening with Chevron right now?
Actually, that's a very good pivot, because this constitutional reform is also kind of intertwined with the relation with the United States. So the idea that, does the government become more, does the government make the constitution more flexible for corporate interests in exchange for some sanctions relief? Is that their viewpoint in the long term? There's a lot of speculation about that, but when you talk about the U.S. policy towards Venezuela, it's only been 8 months since Trump took office, and it's been completely schizophrenic. So first he took office, and Granol came to Caracas and met with Maduro to set up the deportation flights. And at the time, they said, Chevron's license is not at risk. Then the so-called crazy Cubans demanded something in exchange for supporting, I think it wasn't the big beautiful bill, it was the one before. And so they suspended the Chevron license. Then they extended the wind down period for Chevron. Then Trump needed the crazy Cubans again, so he let the Chevron license expire. And then in late July, there was this prisoner exchange when 10 U.S. Nationals and residents returned from Venezuela to the U.S. They had been detained here on different charges in exchange for the 252 migrants who were outrageously sent to this mega prison in El Salvador. And
so
just a few days later,
they got them back.
Oh, I did not know that.
They went back late last month. And just after that,
somehow I missed it.
Not formally, the administration gave Chevron a new license to basically go back to doing what they were doing before, with some minor changes that there's not going to be any direct cash transfer between Chevron and the Venezuelan state, but in all essence it's the same. So it's very, very unpredictable. And then just a few days after that, there's this designation of the Cartel of the Suns, which is the most famous imaginary cartel in history, as a terrorist organization. And then they doubled the bounty for Maduro from 25 to 50 million. A bounty
that I did hear, and that sounded very alarming.
A bounty for information leading to his arrest. But I mean, administration officials were just in Venezuela 2 weeks ago to pick up the U.S. national. So it's very absurd. I mean, the most consensual reading, at least in my view, is that after they walked back the Chevron license, which had also to do with the China fears and so on, which are reasonable. This was kind of a concession to the Florida gang, so that they can have something to talk about and say, oh, we're still going hard after Maduro.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like to me there's probably all that many people that are holding back and saying, well, I wouldn't do anything if it was only 25 million. Yeah, I'm going to want at least 50 for information, because I've got all this information about Maduro I wanted to give.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they think his wife is so angry with him that he's going to call them. But I mean, it could also be an incentive for these uh, harebrained mercenary plots. We remember Operation Gideon in 2020. It's
Yeah.
actually very reminiscent of 2020 because Trump announced, for the first time, not Trump, the Justice Department, this quote unquote narco terrorism indictment that somehow Maduro in his free time is conspiring to flood the U.S. with drugs. And they announced first the 15 million reward, which you would think was not enough because they had to raise it now to 50. And a few months after that, there was Operation Gideon when these Green Berets and these military deserters tried to enter Venezuela and they were neutralized in 5 minutes. But before that, there
The Bay
was
of Piglets.
the Bay of Piglets, precisely. But before that, there was also a kind of a naval show of force where the U.S. Army, the U.S. Navy sent a force to the Caribbean and close to Venezuelan waters, and at the time they called it the biggest deployment since the 1989 invasion of Panama. So it was supposed to be a kind of flexing. And now, just a few days ago, there was also an announcement that they're going to send some Navy assets and Marines to the Southern Caribbean to quote unquote counter narcotics. But I mean, of course, it's dangerous when you have military assets all over the place and unpredictable leaders like Trump. But it just seems like there's a lot of theater going on as well.
But I mean, theater, okay, fine, you can play at that stuff, but something could go wrong, something could happen, and then there could be, some reason for the U.S. to invade or bomb or whatever Venezuela. That they could use it as an excuse.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. The one thing that's been a constant is not letting up on the narrative that, if eventually there needs to be an invasion or a coup or so on, the narrative has consistently been uh, fueled and fed with these, narco-terrorism allegations and Tren de Aragua, even though it's even too much for the U.S. intelligence community to have these allegations that Maduro is. I mean, it's not even clear what Tren de Aragua is, even less
It's
so
people with
whether
Michael Jordan tattoos, apparently.
yeah, I mean, it's a very low bar. I mean, lots of people belong to Tren de Aragua without knowing. And of course, it's dangerous because they can get arrested and deported, even though
Yeah.
they
Yeah,
haven't done
yeah.
anything.
Yeah, I'm
But
thinking of getting a tattoo. I need to get advice on how not to get a Tren de Aragua.
not to
Because
become
could be anything, you just never know. You got to go to like their little website that shows all the different tattoos that could possibly be.
you can have like
Don't pick
the
one of those out.
Yeah.
the catalog. But it shows that I don't think there's anything on the cards right now, and some officials have kind of said that it's up to the Venezuelan people to quote unquote free themselves. That just means that they don't have any notion of reliable forces here on the ground that would support regime change, not even in terms of political leadership, let alone this long-standing dream of a fracture within the Venezuelan military. So in that sense, that they're just gonna flex and maintain this narrative, and hope in their minds at some point it might be useful. Right now, I think they just want to maintain some kind of pressure, but I mean, they just allowed Chevron back in the country. That would signify that they don't have anything in mind, although, who knows?
How are things with? Is it Guyana?
Guyana.
Yeah.
Yes, the world's longest standing border dispute.
And they're about to have elections, right, in Guyana?
I think yeah, they are. But this issue is kind of,
Has it
I mean,
quieted down?
it comes and goes, but I mean that in Guyana, there's kind of unanimous support for their own sovereign claim over this territory. So it
I
doesn't
would
really
think
matter
so. Yeah.
who is in power for this particular issue. But I mean, there was some slight news last week because there's this ongoing process at the International Court of Justice where, so I mean, long story short, this was, as far as I understand, and as far as historians explain, this was Venezuelan territory after independence, early 1800s, and the British, who controlled the territory next door, recognized it when Bolivar sent an ambassador to London. But then, as the 19th century went on, British settlers started discovering gold, and they started encroaching more and more into Venezuela. To the point, but this is very, jungle terrain, very sparsely populated. But then, at some point they were so deep into Venezuelan territory that it caused a reaction. And believe it or not, the Venezuelan government reached out to the United States and urged it to invoke the Monroe Doctrine and
Oh my gosh.
drive the Brits back in the U.S. The U.S.'s hemisphere, in their own language. So the U.S. got involved. There was some kind of mediation, an arbitration tribunal, which just sidelined the Venezuelan side altogether and cooked up an agreement and awarded the territory to Great Britain. So it was a great betrayal of Venezuela. And this became
Never
like
trust the Monroe Doctrine.
yeah, bad
Never
idea to
trust the
begin
U.S.
with. But then, in the 1960s, again, very paradoxical. When Guyana was about to become independent, the party that was coming into power was progressive and had ties with Cuba. And so the US used its right-wing allies in Venezuela to, again, bring up this territorial issue to kind of undermine the progressive government in Guyana. And so this issue surfaced again, and there was a UN commission set up and so on. And in the end, they came up with an agreement, the Geneva Agreement, which states that both sides will eventually reach a mutually acceptable solution, something along these lines. And this was 1966, and then 50 years go by, and nobody really cares about this this territory with I don't know 160,000 square meters and 40,000 inhabitants, something like this, until there are these massive oil discoveries offshore, and of course that spikes again the Venezuelan territorial claim. And so to fast forward to the present, what Guyana did was that they went to the International Court of Justice and said, we want the 1899 arbitration ruling to be ratified, even though there's lots of evidence that it was fraudulent. And Venezuela maintains that only the Geneva Agreement is a binding mechanism to solve this issue. It has gone along with the ICJ process and presented its own evidence, even though it's very contradictory, because Venezuelan officials and lawyers go and say, oh, here's the unquestionable proof that this is Venezuelan territory and our claim is valid and the Guyanese don't have anything, but we do not recognize the ICJ's authority on the matter. So it's kind of, we are right, but if the decision goes against us, we will not recognize it. They are trying to play this game and see where it takes it. Yeah. But the problem is that the U.S. has taken advantage to kind of boost its military presence in the Caribbean, increase its participation in joint drills with Guyanese forces, because it's a perfect excuse to have some closer launch pad to attack Venezuela if it's necessary. So every now and then there are these kinds of flashpoints along the border where some illegal mining group has a shootout with Guyanese forces, and then they trade blame and so on. So it's mostly a dormant issue, but again, it gets picked up on certain occasions.
It's shows up when it's useful for the United States to like batter one side or the other, and then it kind of recedes, and it's like it really just needs to get resolved so it'll be taken off the table as anything that can be used against either country by external forces. It just needs to get fixed.
Yeah, the problem is that the positions have become so extreme that right now there isn't really a political solution on the horizon. Here in Venezuela, we had these governor elections I was mentioning, and Venezuela, believe it or not, elected a governor for this territory, even though it does not control it. And so it had polling places on this side of the border to elect a governor on the other side. So there's a lot of political theater here as well. And this idea that, this is ours and it's unquestionably ours, which doesn't really open much room for negotiation, because you take it so far that it has a big political cost to then recede.
So, what is happening elsewhere? How's Colombia? How's
I was hoping we could talk about, and I would also get your perspective on the U.S. side of things. This kind of tariff war with Brazil, not a war yet, but this looming tariffs with Brazil, which, I mean, it never, we should never say that something is too absurd for the Trump administration, but this has got to be up there, right? I mean,
yes,
creating a trade war with the biggest country in Latin America because of Bolsonaro.
and a main part of BRICS.
Well, BRICS is like 3 countries. I don't think it'll last very long. They're not going to be able to do anything.
Yeah,
You're doing your best, Trump.
Yeah, I mean, it's so ridiculous, right? Because it's like, I mean, I mean, they're what, like 11 full members now, and they've got like 21 partners and like 25 applicants and like 15 of this category. It's like half the world is like somehow associated with BRICS.
it's just like the non-aligned movement all over again. But I mean, here, I mean, if I had a dime for every time I heard this, I read this headline, BRICS moving forward with alternative payment system. I mean, I wouldn't be a millionaire, but I would have, I don't know, $20 right now. Because I mean, that's the thing,
Join
right?
the club.
If it's just going to be a platform for making joint diplomatic political statements, fine, but it's not really going to be transformative. And we have seen lots of examples. I mean, just a few months ago, we had Israel attack Iran, and Iran is a member of BRICS, and BRICS did not have a joint position on the matter. They were just acting each one on their own accord, once through the Security Council and things like this. So it seems to me like it got diluted before it could come to grips with what it was supposed to be, and so it doesn't have like a clear political direction. So, I mean, it will, in the case going back to Brazil, we could say that this will favor BRICS in a very loose sense. That, I mean, if the US is going to act like this, then Brazilian producers are going to turn to markets like India and China. But I mean, this might have happened if BRICS did not exist. So it's not necessarily a consequence. But I struggle to grasp how even the Trump administration thinks this is a good idea.
Well, I don't know that anyone necessarily apart from Trump thinks anything is a good idea. I mean, it's Trump kind of does his own thing. I mean, there was I forget which the various stories it was where he announced something crazy, and then a couple other people got him in a back room and threw something in front of his face to sign that rescinded it. It does kind of seem like Trump doesn't half the time know what he himself is doing. He just gets on these little things where he wants to do something. And in this case, it's all very personal. Bolsonaro's a buddy of his. Someone got in his ear and said, "Oh, that's so terrible what they're doing to your friend." Maybe Bolsonaro got in his ear. Someone from Bolsonaro's camp got in his ear, and so he's like, "Oh, you got to stop this, and we'll punish you if you don't stop it." It's like, I mean, he's already. I mean, all the tariffs
regarding the
tariffs, right?
The tariffs be put on if some trial goes through against Bolsonaro.
Drop the charges against my friend, or you're gonna get even more tariffs. I'm giving you more tariffs now because of all this. And it's like
so much for separation of powers.
But I mean, you think there is the fact that you're interfering in another country's internal political system and their judicial system, but there's also, I mean, it's like.
And our Senate.
How does that mean? How does that mean
not
anything to Trump? I mean, Trump just enacted like all these tariffs without like any authority whatsoever to impose tariffs, right?
Congress had no role in it.
it's
they
Congress's
should.
it's Congress's constitutional job to impose taxes. It's not Trump's personal job to just simply announce these things. Nothing that he does. I mean, they can't be done anyway because they're like all these. There's trade agreements with all these countries. You can't just suddenly like impose a tariff on a trade restriction on a country that you have a trade agreement with. But of course, he just did all these things in spite of the fact that it's completely against the U.S. Constitution, completely against domestic law, completely against all the treaties, completely against international law. He just did it anyway, and it's like it's happening. You know, it's like it's not like everyone just says, "Well, that was a joke, right? We don't actually have to pay a tariff." They're collecting the tariff, and they're bragging about how much money they're making with this completely illegal construct that just popped up. It's like, oh yeah, we passed this new tax, which we refuse to call tax. Everyone knows tariffs aren't really taxes. We're making all these countries pay all this huge this money, this tribute to us. It's like, no, it's coming from U.S. businesses, and I mean, it's completely crazy. So it's like you want to ask me how this makes any sort of sense? It doesn't make any sense.
We wonder.
If I'm looking for sense, I found the wrong place.
Yeah.
But in the case of Brazil, I mean, when it comes to Trump, it seems like sometimes there's less than meets the eye because they announce these tariffs and then the next day they say, oh, all this list is exempt. Apparently, orange juice is a major Brazilian export to the United States, so they immediately took out orange juice, energy, and something else, and now they are lobbying for specific agreements to also exempt beef exports and soybeans, these kinds of things. So in the end, it becomes something like that.
All the big things will be exempt.
It becomes something that's completely hollowed, but it still gives Trump this kind of political varnish to say that, oh, I did this and I made them do something.
And it really made it just a reminder that, I mean, some of those industries are areas where Bolsonaro made his money, where he's still heavily invested in these industries. It's like Trump is like tariffing his best friend in order to like save him from the gallows, right? I mean, it's such a ridiculous kind of, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't tariff the precise things that are his industries. Maybe I shouldn't tariff anything that actually is important to the United States. He never thinks anything through. I mean, it's there is a strategy here. I think it's partially a strategy. It's just stupidity, but it is one way or the other. It is his style. Impose something sweeping and then like figure out where it actually is hurting you, and then like wherever there's a lot of the oil, the wheel is squeaking a lot, just roll back those parts. Just see what'll stick and what doesn't.
Yeah, I'm sure he explains it in detail in The Art of the Deal. But in the case of Brazil, I mean that's the thing. I mean, sometimes you can bully small countries into accepting these trade deals. But here, I mean, we're talking about Brazil, and Brazilian leaders have been, I mean, they have not engaged directly in this shouting match. I mean, they have tried to be calm under the circumstances and say, oh, we are happy to negotiate with, both countries' interests at heart. But just today, I was doing some research for this, and the Brazilian government announced a 5.5 billion package to support the exporters who are being affected by the tariffs. So it's one thing to bully a small country, but in a country like Brazil, I mean, it's a big economy. They have mechanisms to maneuver, and then in the long run, they are going to look elsewhere. And in the end, you will have your tariffs, but Brazil will be more resilient to tariffs because they'll have different export markets. And this is not a trick that you can fool over and over again. I mean, at some point, it's not going to be effective anymore.
Well, it's going to be completely ineffective in the long run. I mean, Brazil. I mean, for some of these things, it has a huge internal market anyway, right? It's one of those few countries that has is large enough that its internal market really makes a difference. It's not like some little country that's completely dependent on exports for its survival. But I mean, exports. It's got all these places it can export to. I mean, it's not like it's like 10 miles offshore of the United States and where it's like obvious natural trading partner. I mean, you can stuff goes around the world very quickly and easily these days, and it's like, getting stuff to other
China,
places in the world.
it's easy.
Yeah, it's just not as hard as it used to be, and China's working double time to make sure it's incredibly easy to have all this sort of international trade, and I just yeah I think it's and then there's also, you have to anticipate anything like this. It's going to have a large political backlash against the United States and the Trump administration within all these target countries. Although I have to say, only one person in Mexico came up to me and like bashed Trump to my face about the tariffs. um, and La Jornada, had like one page on that and like 15 pages on Gaza. So that's there are other things on Latin America's
Other
mind.
priorities, yes.
Yeah, which is not necessarily bad, but it does indeed uh, give fresh air to Lula because he can appear, and rightly so, as the political leader that's defending the country's interests,
Mm-hmm.
whereas the Bolsonaro clan and their allies are lobbying a foreign superpower to attack their own country. That's not really
That does
a
not look
sustainable.
good, no.
That's not really a sustainable political position in the long run. I mean, same thing happens with Mexico, and you saw in the last election that the opposition candidates were completely pro-US, and how easily they got swept. So it does seem like something that backfires both in the short term in terms of the political surrogates in other countries, and also in the long run. But I think at the end of the day, when you think about Trump's calculations, and I say this in a very general sense, I think they're mostly directed at his political base, and also as this constant need for distractions. Now there's the controversy of the Epstein files, and so they come up with a summit in Alaska to, have the news talk about something else.
Right. And it also gets people's minds off Gaza.
That, yeah, that too.
You know,
I mean, yeah,
because he doesn't know what to do.
I actually just based on you made a reference early on in the show to my like reading La Jornada to learn Spanish, and that's because we had a little pre-show little chat right as you were about to come on, because I was in Mexico and I was like picking up La Jornada and trying to struggle through it with my bad Spanish, and I kind of thought that we'd spend a chunk of the show actually talking about the Middle East, just because that's such was a big topic down in Mexico when I was there, and I can't generalize the entire hemisphere, but
I mean, it's certainly a big topic here in Venezuela as well. There's constant attention, rallies in support of Palestine, and so on. But yeah, I don't know if if
you have the
there's anything.
formation and the meeting of the Hague Group. I mean, there's all sorts of little things, and it is like all the little actions against all these countries that get invaded by like Israeli tourists and Israeli Hezbollah agents that come in and like do little projects like teaching in a grade school as volunteers, just to like try to whitewash the image of the IDF. I mean, there's all these little stories that I pick up. I mean, we don't have to like spend the last 6 minutes because we've got a big continent to cover, so we don't have to cover the Middle East. But I just thought at least briefly bring that up because it just seems like such a like
But
such a
let's look at it from the Latin America perspective, because you were mentioning the Hague Group, and I think that was a significant step forward in terms of getting countries to stop fooling around and making these kind of lukewarm statements and try and come up with something a bit more forceful. I mean, there's lots of limits, because I mean, if you're going to invite Turkey and I think it was the United Arab Emirates,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to water down any significant action. But at least it shows that it has gotten to a point where even the countries and the leaders who wanted to look away in the beginning, they can no longer do so. And this is not because they have, I mean, their hearts have opened, but because, I mean, it's starting to have a political cost as well. And so we'll have to see if this Hague Group statement and proposed UN General Assembly resolution is going to have enough backing. It doesn't go as far as I think it could in terms of, actually suspending Israel from the United Nations and so on. But if there's some kind of binding mechanism to, I don't know, stop arms trades and so on, everything just starts adding up in terms of the political cost that genocide has to have. Because at some point it's just going to be the US that's giving the Israelis free rein to just do all sorts of massacres and sabotage even their own ceasefire agreements and deliberately starve the Gazans.
Yeah, I just heard that there was like a statement by like 600 former Israeli leaders talking, asking for this to all end. And there's statements from like released Israeli hostages saying this needs to end. And yet you have the Trump administration that's just pushing on with this, and you've got other governments too. They're like 100% like in lockstep behind Israel, no matter what it does. And there's this big political disconnect, and it's got to have some effect at some point.
Yeah, but even within the Trump coalition, there's already some dissent. I mean, I can't remember. I think it was Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yes, it was Marjorie Taylor Greene. Yes.
Who used the G word, genocide and starvation. So it shows that it just becomes so outrageous and just so impossible to look away from that even the most staunch supporters of Israel are having a sort of reckoning. And of course the priority is ending the mass murder that goes on a daily basis, even if it's under some mild and very poor prospect of having like a technocratic government under the Palestinian Authority with the Egyptians and so on. But even Hamas has openly said, you want us to depose arms in exchange for nothing? What sense does it make?
Mm-hmm. No chance. I mean, you get rid of the arms and
they know what happened to the FARC rebels in Colombia, for example.
Right. It will be much easier to just wipe everybody out.
Yeah. You'll either wipe us all out, with our agreement, or without our. I mean, you're going to do what you're going to do, and making it easier for you is not the solution.
Yeah, we've seen what these concessions have worked, how they have worked out over time. So there's no point. It's not a deterrent. So why surrender it even more?
Right.
Any last words in the last minute?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground. In the next ones, we can see how the political scenario is shaping up in Colombia, because there's going to be elections and Petro cannot run again, but that's still far off. There's also going to be elections in Chile in November, and
like at the end of November. Yeah,
the Communist Party candidate actually won the primaries within the left. So
wow.
that's something that hasn't happened before, and it's partly the fault of the Boric government and also the political context in Chile, that there's a lot to unpack there. And always, whenever I come back, there will be an update on Venezuela, which is the thing I'm always most comfortable talking about.
Well, we're glad you got your internet back, and we're glad you're able to join us.
So glad. Talk to you next time.
All right. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
All right. Ricardo Vaz.